welcome Father Greg Boyle to this opportunity to engage us in conversation. And I am delighted to see there's already over 150 screens. I know there's a lot more who have RSVP'd, but you who are already on deserve to be honored for being on time and for us to start, at least with some introductory comments. I'm going to show this more than once, but I want to encourage you to know of Father Greg's books, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, and Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship. I, frankly, living in Orange County, did not know much about Homeboy Industries until recently when Natalie Vishny gifted me these two books. And she said, Rabbi, you need to read these books. And anything Natalie asks me to do, I try and do. And in this case, I started with Tattoos on the Heart, and I was smitten with spending time with Father Greg, and have now finished most of Barking to the Choir. In that regard, I want to pause to acknowledge that tonight's conversation is honoring Natalie and Michael Vishny, both in regard to having introduced me to Father Greg, but also for the ways that they have helped introduce our congregation to Urban Voices, the choir for the homeless in downtown LA, created by our own Liav Sofer, and now also having Anasia Klang on staff. So again, I thank Natalie and Michael for all you do. One word, and then I'm going to get rolling with Father Greg, and that's to acknowledge that at 10 o'clock tonight, there will be on your screen our Slichot services. They'll be 45 minutes long, and they are a wow in terms of, I caught pieces of them, and I want to pause to honor Amy Robinson Katz, who has been our inspiration with so much that we are creating for High Holidays, starting with Slichot tonight. So do tune in. You may have to go to our website, cbi18.org, to get the link, or you'll find it in the letters if you're a congregant. At the end of our conversation, there'll be a little bit of a gap of time, and you'll see a couple of previews. One is a preview for our High Holiday services. In 6 days, Friday night is the first night of Rosh Hashanah. And this year, where we don't have a problem of space, it's all going to be on screens. We are inviting all your family and friends. You don't have to be a member. And I go back to feeling wowed by this creative challenge that Amy Robinson Katz and Helene Coulter and Hal Hurwitz and so many others, along with Josh Friedman, have created. Our relatively modest synagogue is going to be in the big leagues in terms of a traditional experience, well woven with over 100 congregant families woven into the presentation. And last, there'll be a little bit of a commercial for small groups. It's our 5th year of small groups. We're using a book by my teacher and friend, Ron Wolfson from American Jewish University, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven, as a prompt for your own conversation with friends. With that, I'm ready to give all our attention to Father Greg. And I want to say again, thank you. Father Greg and I had a chance just to talk a little bit before we began. I hope you won't mind me sharing. I say that knowing people were able to listen in as it was, to say that Father Greg is somebody who tends to get up very early in the morning to engage in mindful practices of different kinds. And this means that him coming on tonight at this time is the time where normally he would be, if I can say, horizontal rather than sitting up. And so I'm just so grateful to you, Father Greg.
There's no problem. If I nod off, please don't take it personally.
No. But the great challenge I have is having spent time with you through your writing. And I want to say to people who are listening that Father Greg has a gift for storytelling and writing. He has a master's in literature, which for me conveys a love of reading and a love of writing. And the books are exceedingly well written. Tattoos on the Heart, Embarking to the Choir. A little bit about Father Greg. He was ordained as a Jesuit priest in 1984, having received his Master of Divinity from the Weston School of Theology and a Sacred Theology Master's from Jesuit School of Theology. He has been with Homeboy Industries, which he created, since 1988, which, as an aside, Father Greg, is the year that I began in my synagogue, having come straight from seminary to Tustin. So we're on track, moving parallel lines, and I'm glad to intersect with you tonight. So today was not a typical day for what you do. How would you characterize a typical day for what you do and as Father Greg?
Well, there's nothing typical right now. I mean, for the last 6 months, I did, my entire identity was torpedoed, so it's like, all I used to do was, I'd say mass in detention facilities or drag a suitcase through the airport and fly and give talks and take homies with me, or be in my office all day long, and so all that has changed. So, you adapt and you lean into the grief and a little bit, and you try to stay curious about it all. So there's nothing typical any longer for anybody, but Homeboy Industries, it was designated as an essential operation. So we've been operating and such as we can. There's no tattoo removal because our clinic is just too close quarters to do that. We try to have protocols and stuff, but it's just kind of beyond modified at the moment. Gang members still come in trying to get assistance, but it's
so back up 6 months pre-COVID, when life was life, and what was Homeboy Industries in operation like at that time?
Yeah, well, we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. So, so it's just a huge operation, 9 businesses and 700 employees and 400 what we call trainees, people who are in our 18-month training program. We haven't laid anybody off. We're still paying everybody.
Wow.
And we've managed to, maintain kind of Zoom connection in terms of therapy, classes, recovery groups. It's been a challenge. It's asked us to sort of use muscles that we'd never used before. And then we were able to, in the bakery and the cafe, to shift and pivot to, addressing food insecurity here in Los Angeles County. So we have various contracts to provide 10,000 meals a week for seniors and shut-ins and homeless. So that's kept everybody quite busy. So, but it's tough.
Yeah.
But we're a place that, gang members feel comfortable in going to, and they all arrive with, barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and our place kind of knows how to scale those walls with tenderness and receiving people and cherishing them. And so it's still quite compelling, though it's with masks and at a distance.
So in reading Tattoos on the Heart of the creation of Homeboy Industries, there's a Jewish name. See, there is something kind of like Jewish antenna in terms of Jewish people at the best being an extended family. And my wife in particular drew to my attention the story of Ray Stark and how he was an important part of launching. Share with us the role he played and how it launched.
Well, we were just creating these little groups, maintenance crew, landscaping crew, all made up of gang members from the 8 rival gangs. And then in 92, when the unrest hit and every pocket of poverty kind of ignited, our community, which was the poorest Catholic parish in the city, had the highest concentration of gang activity, the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We didn't ignite. And so the LA Times did an article, and I was kind of saying, well, I think because we had 60 strategically hired gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to ignite their own community, maybe that's why things didn't happen. So the article appeared and Ray Stark read it. And then he summoned me to his Beverly Hills office. And he happened to have $500 million, and he said, what should I do with my money? And as I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request, and I said, well, buy this abandoned bakery across the street from our school. It's got ovens, we could fix them all. I don't know, we could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members, and we could have them bake bread, and we could call the place Homeboy Bakery. And right away he said, yeah, sure. And he was a character. He had been one of the great agents before he was a producer, Humphrey Bogart and
Wow.
Kirk Douglas and people. And then he became quite the movie producer for Columbia. And then anyway, he and I always butted heads. I enjoyed it, because he could be irascible, and I could be the same right back at him, and we just loved each other. Yeah.
Well, the world that you have been the father for, namely the gang community, is a world that many of us, myself, know really nothing about up close. What would be 3 things that you would want me and us who are listening to dispel, or the myths that we might have as people without that immediate contact that you would want to teach us?
Yeah, there are tons of myths. I think there's a presumption that kids are seeking something when they join a gang, when they're actually fleeing something. And the 3 things they're fleeing really is, a despair that's really quite deep, and they're unable to imagine a future. There's essentially a lethal absence of hope. And then the fact that they're the most hugely traumatized members of our community. So they don't know how to transform their pain, so they keep transmitting it. And then, real mental health issues. So it's a kind of a combo burger of 1 or 2 or all 3 of those things. But gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and misery loves company. But there's a notion out there that kids join gangs because they're drawn, attracted, and that's just not true. And join a gang, see the world, wine, women, and song. None of that's true. Mm. Even belonging, which people think is an essential. They just want to belong, but the truth is they're fleeing misery. And so if we knew that to be the case, then we would infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, and we would help heal the traumatized. And we deliver mental health services in a timely, culturally appropriate way. That's what we would do. But we kind of have this notion that it's really hard to shake. And it sort of sets, nobody's ever met a healthy, good treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. And so the problem is that, the outsider view has driven the inside of our policy and how we handle this. And so all of that is to say, there's a bad diagnosis here. So gang violence is about something else. And the trick in anything is to find the something else.
And that something else, as you describe it now, is a quality of pain in their own lives, seeking some kind of kinship, a sense of community that they're not finding in broken homes. Is that
Yeah, so I mean, every gang member walks through our doors with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so if it's true that a traumatized person is more likely to cause trauma, then it's equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so if you can create a community of kinship that actually helps heal severed belonging, where they have felt cut off. And so you have to begin with a safe place, a sanctuary, really, and then they become the sanctuary that they sought. And then they go home and they provide this sanctuary to their kids, and suddenly you've broken a cycle. But healing is the key thing, and it's the relationship that heals, and we always want to keep that primary. All the other things, anger management, therapy, classes, even work itself, are secondary to the culture that I like to call, it's a mystical, therapeutic mysticism. It's seeing the whole person. Even Moses, it's about face to face.
Yeah.
And the homies are kind of, they're used to being watched, but they're not used to being seen. And it's face to face. It's like you see the wholeness in people, and then you can stand in awe at what they've had to carry rather than in judgment at how they've carried it.
So it's close to 30 years. So I'm going to give context. I'll just pause for one moment to close to 200 screens at this point. And that's to say, my goal is to talk with Father Greg in our own conversation for another 15, 20 minutes, and then to harvest your questions and answers. So if you see Q&A on your screen, if you would be kind to put in your questions there, that will be my focal point for harvesting so that your voices will be heard. So you've now been involved with ministry to gang members for over 30 years. How many, just throwing out a number, how many, if you will, congregants, constituents, gang members have you been engaged with over that time?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, again, thousands and upon thousands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a flow of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I go around the country, I used to anyway, and you go to find comparable programs, and people always ask the same question, which I always found kind of curious. They'd say, how do you get the gang members to show up at your place? Which was clearly a problem they were experiencing. And I thought, wow, we've never had that issue. I mean,
Really?
we've been around for 32 years as an organization, and gang members, there isn't a gang member in LA County who doesn't know where we are or what we do. Or
Wow. How does gang violence now in LA County compare? If you look at these 32 years, what's the current level? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, so, the decade of death was 88 to 98.
Mm.
And then the highest moment was 92, when we had 1,000 gang-related homicides in Los Angeles. And since then, that number has been cut in half and then cut in half again. It's
Wow.
still a lot of deaths. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 236th 2 weeks ago, a young woman named Brandy who used to work for us. And so it's continued. But in the bad old days, I mean, I was burying 8 kids in a 3-week period, and there were shootings morning, noon, and night. It was just horrific.
So
And so we're not in that moment.
if you were talking to a young priest or a young Father Greg, what would be your guidance on how to deal with the, this kind of pain of burying people that you work with, often cut down at such a young age? What would be your guidance to how to respond as a spiritual figure?
Well, I think I'm odd when it comes to like death and stuff, because I've sort of had to put death in its place. If death is the worst thing that can happen to you, you're going to be toppled by life itself. And so you want to, a homie said to me once, whose brother had died, and he has since been murdered himself. But he used to say, death is a punk, which is to say it has no power. And so the only power is our true selves in loving. And so somehow you want to be connected to that at all times, But what I would say to a young Greg Boyle who had hair and no white, I would say it's not about you. You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different, so that the widow, orphan, and stranger alter your heart. And it's not about saving, fixing, rescuing. A guy who was a former gang member in Houston, and he was working with gang members in the streets of Houston. After a talk I gave there, he said, how do you reach them? Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? And then suddenly that turns everything on its head. You won't ever burn out because it's eternally replenishing when you're allowing yourself to be reached, when you're receiving people. But if it's about you, and if you go to the margins to make a difference, it's about you, then it's about fixing, rescuing, saving, transforming, and you'll get depleted because you've allowed it to become about you. So, I mean, that would be my advice.
So, I mentioned in the introduction that we're going to have these series of conversations on what are the questions you're going to be asked in heaven based on some statements in the Talmud. Have you been asked by a homie what questions they'll be asked in the next life? And what do you say?
I wouldn't say that I get asked that often. although I'm writing my 3rd book, and so I was just writing a story about a kid named Louis whose brother killed himself, which never happens among gang members. It's the rarest thing.
Why is that?
They're more likely to walk into enemies' territory, an enemy's territory, than they are to take their own life. But so he wanted to know, and he was quite, distraught. He said, "Where is my brother?" And I said, "Well, God can see the wholeness of people and what they carry and what they've been through, and these were kids whose, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. Horrific childhoods and torturous, and nobody healthy takes their own life. And so none of us are well until all of us are well, and none of us are whole until all of us are whole. So I said, there is no doubt that your brother is resting in the stillness of God.
It's a reminder again that lives are complicated, and beyond the surface, there are more foundational issues that define a person and how they would be heard and seen by a caring presence.
Yeah, and also, I think a game changer for me is this adverse childhood experiences study, and it's a checklist of 10 things. And if these 10 things happen to you under the age of 18, a parent mentally ill, or parent in prison, or sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, verbal abuse, there's 10 things. And experts say that if you suffered 4 or 5 of those things, you are going to have health issues and socializing issues. And I grew up in LA, and I'm a 0 on the ACEs study, a 0.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me morally superior. That probably says more about white privilege and winning the zip code lottery.
So
But every single man or woman who walks through our doors is a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs, which is extraordinary. You can almost barely wrap your mind around the enormity of what they've endured before the age of 18. Once you know that, then suddenly you stand in awe.
So I have 2 questions, and I'm going to turn it over to the Q&As. Was your family surprised that you chose to become a priest?
Well, we were very Catholic, and kind of a Norman Rockwell painting. We were 8 kids, and my father came from a family of 9, and he had a younger brother who was a Jesuit priest. So I wouldn't say I entered the Jesuits because of him, but I was educated by the Jesuits, so that had a great influence on me. So, yeah.
And if there was one thing that you could do societally, if you were in a legislation, wielding the pen, what's the one thing that you would start with in addressing this problem of the pain of the youth that leads to gangs?
Well, I would probably try to address mass incarceration. I think we have this notion, the largest mental institution on the planet Earth is the LA County Jail. So that tells you how badly we're addressing this. And so we've chosen to punish wound and brokenness and pain rather than heal it. So I would begin there, I think. I see that somebody was asking about my red. So
yeah,
and
there's a Jewish significance to that too. But
yeah,
I read about it.
Yeah, the Dalai Lama gave it to me. But what's the Jewish significance?
Well, you will find it's part of folk tradition, and what fascinates me is how universal it is. Red is identified with higher in the Jewish tradition. It's a sign of protection against evil forces. And the idea is in the folk tradition that bad spirits are drawn to red, higher frequency, red light district. So red catches their attention. So by having red, they're distracted, and you can't get the evil eye. So that's in the Jewish folk tradition.
Well, there you go. That works for me. And that's also why the California Highway Patrol always goes after red cars when they get
cars. Right. So since you touched on that, and I am a fan of the Dalai Lama through.
No, I just saw that was written down here, so I got distracted. But
But
yeah, he gave it to me. I think it's probably 15 years ago now.
wow, you've taken good care of it.
Yeah,
And,
I've never taken it off.
and what does it mean to you to have it in light of the gift that it and the person who gave it?
Well, I mean, I love the Dalai Lama. I was privileged to meet him and talk to him, and we shared a stage together. And he was the opening keynote, and I was the closing person. And he kind of blesses it. He kind of breathes on it, and he holds it up to his head, and it was very moving. So the thing I treasure.
I had the chance, this is an aside, to hear him speak on his first visit, I believe, to America in 1975.
Wow.
And he could hardly speak English, but I was so smitten by his giggle, even then, that I said, this is the real deal.
Read the book on joy with him and Desmond Tutu, and it's joyous. It's so hilarious. They're so funny together.
Well, I did smile when you wrote about being on the stage with him and him laughing at your joke and you saying, I can now check that off my bucket list.
I made the Dalai Lama laugh.
So let me turn to some of the questions here. So what government policies would most directly help gang members now? So somebody asked the question I basically asked you. So in your answer, and you may want to build on it, and that is that your first place to begin is prison reform.
Well, I guess so, but a lot of times people will say, no justice, no peace, for example.
Right.
Or if you want justice, work for peace. But I would say no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so, the problem, as Mother Teresa said, is we've drawn our family circles too small. And so how do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? So I'm kind of not a get in the weeds guy. I mean, I think everything's about something else. And so, kinship is about exquisite mutuality. There is no us and them. How do we obliterate the illusion that we're separate? And so I kind of try to address that, at least Homeboy tries to do that. Policies will work itself out if what undergirds our efforts is a community of belonging, a sangha, as they say, a Buddhist, kind of a sense of belonging. Are we really addressing severed belonging? And the homies kind of represent that, and Homeboy Industries tries to represent kind of, we want to be the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in, a place of connection, especially in this era of divisive tribalism. And
so let me combine the question that you're responding to now with what I see as the next question, which is Bernice Kersner's question, but I'm going to change it a little. And that is looking forward 5 years, because Bernice asks about the trajectory of gangs, and you answered that a little bit in terms of 88 to 98 and now. But what would be your hope 5 years from now and gangs in LA? How would it be different, and what would it take?
Well, I think Homeboy Industries has had an impact on gang violence. I think every chief of police since Bratton would say that it had, and, we've sort of dealt with the issue of, and the question, what if we were to invest in people rather than just incarcerate our way out of this issue? So, but we have so many incarcerated, more than any country on the planet. And so we're going to be dealing with returning citizens. How do we honor their dignity and their nobility as human beings? And how do we,
in that regard, have you visited, I don't know how it works, frankly, up close, but private prisons versus public prisons in California?
no, I don't think I've ever been to a private one.
So that's more, I think, outside of California.
Probably. I mean, I've been to every state prison in California.
Yeah.
And then before the pandemic anyway, I was doing services in every detention facility in the county, which unfortunately we've had a lot of them.
Can you talk, I'm responding to Helene Coulter, wanting to have a better understanding of women and gangs, and talk a little bit, we think of men as being members of gangs, less so of homegirls. Talk a little bit about women in gangs and the relationship of women and men in homeboy industries.
Yeah, so, when we started Homeboy Industries in 1988, nobody thought twice about calling it Homeboy Industries. Nobody did. Because it was it was 95% male in the county of Los Angeles. Now, cut to 32 years later, it's even higher. It's like 97% male. So it's a little bit like if you were running a domestic violence shelter for women and somebody came up to you and said, well, where are the men? I mean, men are victims of domestic violence. And you would say, well, yeah, they are. But, it's like 5%. Still, in this day and age, you really have to be more expansive. And so we kind of changed to who we were from formerly gang involved to include previously incarcerated. So all the men who work at Homeboy, and it's like 70% male, all the men are gang members. And all the women, 30, whatever it is, percent, all the women are at least felons. But, if we restricted ourselves to just have women who are only women who are gang members, we wouldn't have any women. So we kind of shifted a little bit. And then we started Homegirl Cafe, but it's always been a guy thing if you're talking about the gang piece. Having said that, all the women who are gang members are the most traumatized human beings of the whole group. They're all 10s on the ACEs study. So they've all been through horrific things.
And in reading your books, a lot of it are the stories of the former gang members and some former women felons speaking to, if you will, audiences like ourselves, people who don't have direct experience. How would you characterize the impact that Homeboy intervention has made in changing the perception in the larger Southern California community and national community?
Yeah, well, so we've been around for 32 years, but keep in mind that the first 10 years was really it was demonizing writ large. It was bomb threats, death threats, and hate mail. And none of it was from gang members, of course, because we were already pretty established as we're here to help gang members. But if society virtually all our hate mail was from law enforcement. I'm a sheriff. I hate you. You're part of the problem. It was kind of extraordinary. But that was part of the air we would breathe. I'd brace myself every morning as I rewound the answering machine and listened to, because it was horrific things. Now I can say none of that happens now. And this is to those who say there's, we never make progress, as Barack Obama would say, you're not paying attention if you think we haven't made progress. And so we have, but the demonizing was really quite extraordinary. So in the old days, I would go out and speak and I would tell stories because I wanted to put a human face on this highly demonized other. And then, I would bring homies subsequently who would come and tell their stories, and people were always moved, So I think that's the key, if people can't come down to the barrio and meet a gang member, well, then we can go to them and people can tell their stories and suddenly people are connected.
Well, I want to thank Rochelle Ambersound for that question. Ed Heyman asks, what are the requirements that you have for these former gang members to work for Homeboy programs?
Well, we're not a program that exists for those who need help. We're only here for those who want it. So it's like a drug rehab. You have to walk in the door. If we had an alcohol rehab program, we wouldn't be, sending people to bars and sidling up to people and say, hey, I couldn't help notice that was your 10th beer. We don't do that with gang members. Everybody knows where we are, and it takes what it takes. So when they're ready to walk through the doors, we're ready to receive them. But, we have we drug test people because we don't want people to numb themselves as they do the work, the inner work. And so, we interview them, but it's not like any other program. If you're belligerent, hard-headed, and have a bad attitude, we want you. You're the one we want.
What's the
so
average?
That's kind of how it works.
What's the average engagement? How long does somebody who starts working for Homeboy continue on average?
Yeah, 18 months. We have an 18-month training program. So everybody wants in on that. That's a paid gig.
That's training.
Yeah, training, but we say training, but it's really the healing, the therapy, the classes. We also, they work in our businesses and such.
What's the therapy component or the healing component?
Well, everybody has a therapist.
Oh, really?
We have 4 paid therapists and 49 volunteer therapists, including 2 psychiatrists. But the 18 months, is sort of akin to the 18 months that it takes for a child to attach to a caregiver. So and if our task really is attachment repair, so it works, perfectly, because if you surrender to the essential foundational healing at Homeboy, then it's going to work and you're going to discover a newfound resilience that will carry you, having been held in a community and a culture that nurtures you. So we're not interested in surviving as the fittest, but thriving as the nurtured. And that's the palpable experience, I think, of everyone who goes through the program.
Alita Bryant, who's a former DA, asks about gang reduction and intervention programs, GRIP, that the Orange County DA has as an early gang intervention program. What's your experience with that in LA and LA County and its success?
Yeah, it's difficult, because I think we have notions that kind of drive the policy. And so a good program, by the way, in Orange County is Project Kinship.
Say a word about Project Kinship.
Well, we have a thing called the Global Homeboy Network. So we have partners that have been sort of born from Homeboy. So rather than airlift Homeboy Industries into Orange County, we help folks start their own program. And so Project Kinship has been around for a number of years, quite successful, and we're heartened that there are 300 programs in the country and in the world that have been born in such a way.
Wow.
And so we gather every August, as we just did, and for
So,
3 days. We did it virtually this year, of course, but
and does Homeboy convene that gathering of those 300?
yeah, it's called the Global Homeboy Network. So we have, Braveheart Industries in Glasgow and Rise Up Industries in San Diego. So
Wow.
Sydney and Guatemala City and different places that have kind of taken the methodology of Homeboy and have adapted it to their own needs in their own particular place. But the answer to that question is that my concern always is to get the diagnosis right. And I'm afraid that a lot of our programs across the country are so content driven that it's about message and about somehow inserting some kind of word so that kids will make better choices, like they think that's what this is about.
As if it's intellectual.
Yeah, but Homeboy isn't about content, it's about context.
Yeah.
And it's the context that saves and heals and transforms. It's the community.
Yeah.
And I never say I transform the lives of gang members, but I do say at Homeboy transformation happens, and everybody is kind of a practitioner of cherishing and paying attention. So loving, caring adults who pay attention, that's the prevention program. And that's all you need. It's not really that complicated. Kids aren't going to remember what you tell them, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel.
Now,
so the programs that can do that are the best ones.
So pause to acknowledge that you've now largely answered Mindy Lauer-Levin's question about how Homeboys has expanded on the national level. But I have a question in that regard. How much of the success of Homeboys is because of a religious context? Or in your experience with these 300, what's the role of religion or not in making a difference in creating a home for gang members?
Yeah, I wouldn't say religion is, because certainly we're the gamut, from Buddhist to Catholic to not,
But
to atheists, so it's not, there's not a kind of a, it's sort of beyond religion. Religion sort of makes, I don't know. I don't mean to go out on a theological tree climbing here, but
right.
But you want to be authentic, and are people living as though the truth were true? Are they putting first things recognizably first? Are they anchored in the things that matter, like inclusion and nonviolence and unconditional loving kindness and compassion and acceptance? People look to that rather than kind of, what's sort of the religious component. And I always talk about kind of the healing that happens there. I can remember a whole group from the George Bush administration came to visit us and wanted us to talk about the faith part. And I had just finished spouting off about 20 minutes of what we did at Homeboy. And he said, but could you say something about the faith part? And I said, I'm sorry, I felt I just did. I just spent 20 minutes doing that. That's what it is. That's what it looks like. That's voting with your feet.
And creating heart connections,
and
regardless of belief system.
And somehow that's trying to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving kindness. And
say another word about that, about your own experience. And again, this is Father Greg. What is the way that God is manifest through you, or if you will, in the world?
Well, I think that the idea is that nothing should stay static or locked in some container. You're always supposed to, I think, evolve. And you're obviously, what both of us believed when we were 5 and then 10 And then 15 has kind of matured. There's a kind of a level of consciousness, which is as it should be. We're suddenly, I'm a Jesuit, so Saint Ignatius of Loyola always talked about the God who's always greater, which is to say, once you think you've kind of corralled this notion, no, it's more spacious than that. It's more expansive. It's the God who loves us without measure and without regret. And then suddenly you're imitating the God we actually have, rather than settling for the partial God who's judgmental and exacting and difficult to be with.
Let me go back to the questions. And Helene Coulter wants to know, of the people who've come through Homeboy, what's the rate of those who return to gang life?
Well, it's interesting. We had UCLA did a study, and so recidivism rate, which means folks who go back to prison. Then this was probably 10 years ago now. It was 70% of those released from prison return to prison, and 30% don't. And Homeboy has turned that on its head. So 30% of the folks who go through our doors go back to prison, and 70% don't. So, and these are really wounded, broken folks who have a lot of things to kind of navigate, and it's difficult. And so, but that's the way we want it. If that's why we don't care that much about evidence and outcomes and measuring, because then we'd start to work only with the most likely to succeed, and we don't want to do that. So the more difficult somebody is, but they're there, they walk through the door, they showed up. That used to always happen in the early days at one of our businesses at our silk screen. Ruben, who's a great guy, ran the place. He said, that new guy, Sergio, you sent me, he doesn't want to be here. I said, well, where is he right now? He said, he's here. I said, if he didn't want to be there, trust me, he wouldn't be there. And so, yeah, he's difficult, but we don't get tripped up by behavior at Homeboy, because we know it's just a language of people who are in pain. So we don't see sin, we see son, and we kind of want to maintain that no matter how difficult that gets. There's a guy right now who's so hard and so difficult, and people want to toss him out because he's so belligerent and flies off the handle. Well, when he was born, his mom threw him in a dumpster.
Wow.
And then a handful of years later, when he's in foster care, the people in charge of taking care of him set him on fire.
Wow.
And it only went downhill from there. And so you start to go, yeah, this is the language of someone who's in pain, but it's the relationship that will heal. So, and if they're dealing with severed belonging, how do you love in such a way that people attach and feel safe?
So in that regard, I'm going to pause to say we're going to be about 5 or 10 more minutes of questions, then we'll move to closing. And I want to apologize because I see there's been 32 questions. I've been going more or less in order. So apologies to all who have asked wonderful questions. This is why we need more time with Father Greg. But back to the next question. Ellen Mirowitz, which builds off what you were just sharing. You've had success with gang members by creating a caring community of dignity, of work, of kinship. What are your thoughts on applying what Homeboy has learned to helping with the homeless and the trauma that is also underneath many of the homeless?
Yeah, we get a lot of delegations and people come through. And before the pandemic, we had a group from Detroit, and I presume they were there to kind of address youth violence or gangs or that kind of thing, disaffected youth. But they came to Homeboy because they wanted to address their homeless issue. And I thought, wow, it actually makes sense to me. So the starting point really is safe place, because every homeless person, as well as every gang member, is in survivor brain. And unless you can find a place where they can rest and know that it's safe and they can trust it, and then you take it from there. But certainly, none of us are well till all of us are well. And so homeless folks are people who are broken. They're not there because they're unemployed. They're there because they carry more than the rest of us. So how do we help them? How do we include them and help them regain a sense of belonging and connection? And so then stuff works. Then, you can house people, but it's again, the starting point is kinship. So whether, if you don't think homeless people belong to us, then you won't be able to ever come up with a solution or a policy that will meet it.
So what I hear and learn from you is that it's creating a sense of belonging that's the context for people to find their worth and their dignity. And that's true for what Homeboy Industries is doing, but it's true in response to homeless, of a larger need in society. Two quick questions, and then I'll move toward closing. For the people who are engaged with Homeboy Industries, what's the age range? And what's the, if you will, the median age?
Yeah, so our youngest are 14, because that's the age at which a kid can work in a nonprofit legally and get a check. And then lately, we've been getting guys who've been coming out of prison after 30 plus years. So some of them are my age. So that's the gamut, and we have a particular kind of youth program, which it takes place in our old office, which is in Boyle Heights. Our new headquarters, it's since 2008, but it's in Chinatown. So youth is 14 to 25, but it's really 14 to 18 are the ones that we have special needs, because they're so young, and we have different kinds of programs that they require. But it's that whole gamut from 14 to 65.
What's the average age, would you say?
I don't know. I'd say, late 20s, early 30s. That's the average.
Now that was Bob Sklar's question. Joe Cooperberg asks about foster care. What percentage of the kids who are engaged with Homeboy at some point came through foster care, one? And two, in light of your experience with that process, what would be your guidance for foster care?
Oh, it's interesting. I think a great many have had experience in the foster care system. But I would say the majority haven't. And that's partly, they had enough of an extended family where people just took folks in. But I don't know if I know enough about the foster care system to have a recommendation for that. But, people had good experiences and people had bad, as you would expect. But the more vigilance, the better, because, we just need to be attentive to kids having a palpable experience of being valued. That's how they know that they're valuable, and have dignity the Buddhists talk about, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. And so that you need enough people to hold the mirror up and return people to themselves and say you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then, if you see people with tenderness, then they become tender, and and that's kind of an essential thing.
So you just used a phrase. This is now moving to the closing. And now I'm having you be Father Boyle for us as a community. The phrase you just used is that the goal is to be able to return people to themselves. And I circle the word return because this period, as we move to the new year, is a period that in Hebrew is called teshuvah, which means return. So for us as a community, or as individuals, I should say, within a community, what's the one blessing you have for us to return to ourselves?
Well, I think we need to find the goodness in each other, people are unshakably good. I think that's the truth of who we are. And the problem is that there are a lot of things that stop us from seeing that truth. That, homies will say, how do I become a better person? And I go, wow, no, you couldn't be one bit better. So they just have to discover that truth underneath all the baggage and hurt and the brokenness. And so you want people to be reminded. And so you look for the innocence and for the goodness, and everybody was born wanting the same things. And I think, once you see pain rather than stain, once you see, what people have to carry, you just stand in awe. And so the opposite of awe is judgment. So the more we can, leave judgment behind, the better.
So embarking to the choir, this is the last question, and I'll pull it together. You write about how in recent years, more and more, you're surprised to find people asking you for blessings. So if I'm going to, in that light, ask you to give us a blessing as a community as we move toward a new year.
Yes, I pray then that the God who loves us without measure and without regret will bless you all to stand in the right place and to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away, and stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless and the widow and the orphan and the stranger, so that together we can imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And we make this prayer in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I felt that my heart was opened. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It's
and
good
I want to,
being with you.
again, thank you for making this time to uplift us toward our Slichot service, to remind people that they can go onto the email that's been sent out or to the website for the 10 o'clock opportunity. There'll be a couple of commercials if you stay on the line. But first and foremost, again, Father Greg, you are a gift to us tonight, and may you be blessed with your typing continue to flow so that book number 3 emerges through you, and may your creating community only strengthen the community that you create the community for. And we say amen.
Thank you very much. Great being with you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you. Blessings. Be well. So please do stay on. If you're still on to watch this, you will be impressed by a coming attraction for high holidays through CBI. Just need the sound, Helene.
Wow.
Make the old new and the new holy. Ribono Shalom, Master of the Universe. It is a celebration tonight.
And now there'll be one more about, now there'll be one little one about small groups and another offer for you to participate.
This year, our small groups focuses on a book written by my friend and teacher, Dr. Ron Wolfson, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. We've also put together a booklet with conversation questions. Small groups is your opportunity to join with friends in meaningful conversation. And what you've said to me over the previous 4 small groups is that you have enjoyed deepening your friendships. Join this year as a host or a participant. Listen as Batya Swed, our chair of small groups, gives a little bit more context and then some testimonials of last year's participants.
By joining a synagogue, one becomes part of a community, and with that comes a sense of belonging. Members also seek spiritual, educational, and personal growth.
My small groups were composed of anywhere from 5 to 8 families, and we delved into thoughtful and candid discussions, and we really bonded as a group.
The great thing about the discussion groups was how surprisingly deep everyone got in their conversation.
I'm the great Bubby. I'm the Bubby.
I'm the daughter. I'm the daughter of the daughter, or the first generation.
For our small group, we gathered 4 generations from our family to learn what it meant to act like and truly become a mensch.
Learning together in our small group was truly an incredible, inspirational, delightful, wonderful, and powerful experience.
Our small group consists of 2 Jews and 4 Catholics. We've been studying for 7 years. We've gone through Rabbi's booklets. We have gotten greater spirituality and insight into our Judaism, and have gotten insights with our Catholic friends who have now recognized the fact that we have more in common than difference.
Hi, we're Colin and Francine Winhart in Tustin, California. And I'm Joel Winhart in New York City.
And we enjoy doing Rabbi Spitz's small group conversations because we get to spend time together, do personal reflection, and explore our Judaism.
Hosting a small group this year. Each of our hosts will receive a gift bag with books and the study guide for all your participants and treats for you. This is the time to have a Zoom conversation with friends on a topic that is meaningful and elevating. I look forward to hearing about the success of your group and to being a resource for you.
Thank you all for tuning in. Wishes to all of you, for all of us, of a good and sweet new year. L'shana tova u'metuka.